regular meeting of the Mishawaka Common Council for Monday, July 17th, 2023 will please come to order. Good evening. Those of you who are in attendance this evening, welcome. We're glad you're here. If you would, please take a moment to check your cell phone to make sure that you have turned it off or silenced it. And for those of you participating remotely, we welcome you also. With respect to those participating remotely, members of the public are asked to place their microphone on mute during the meeting with the exception of any public hearing. At the appropriate point in the hearing, I will invite the public to unmute their microphone for purposes of submitting any comments they may wish to make, one person at a time. All persons wishing to make public comments will be asked to first state their name and address for the record, and after completing the comment, members of the public are once again asked to place their microphone on mute, and we thank all of you for your cooperation this evening. At this time, if you would, please join us in rising for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Hazen?
Here.
Mr. Belovich?
Here.
Mr. Mamalenti?
Here.
Mr. Benicki?
Here.
Mr. Emmons?
Here.
Mrs. DeMade?
Here.
Mr. Compton?
Here.
Mrs. Volker?
I'm here.
Mr. Hicksenbach?
Here. Approval of the minutes of our regular meeting of July 10th, 2023. Are there any additions or corrections? Then hearing none, the minutes stand approved as received from the clerk's office. Petitions, communications, remonstrance, and memorial.
Yes, Mr. President, we have a letter from the Historic Preservation Commission regarding their recommendation for their July 5th meeting. Honorable members, a regular meeting of the Historic Preservation Commission was held on the above referenced date, at which time the following ordinance was considered. HPC 23-02, a proposed ordinance submitted by Brent F. Spring to establish 1202 East Mishawaka Avenue in Mishawaka, Indiana as a local historic landmark. The property is legally described as lots 232, 233, and 234 in Lincoln Garden Realty Corporation, First Edition, City of Mishawaka, Penn Township, St. Joseph County, State of Indiana. The Commission recommended approval. Pursuant to Indiana Code 36-7-11, the Historic Preservation Commission hereby certifies to the Mishawaka Common Council the attached proposed ordinance regarding the above matter. This is signed by Krista Hill. We also have a letter from the City Plan Commission regarding their recommendations from their July 11th meeting. Honorable members, a regular meeting of the Mishawaka Plan Commission was held on the above referenced date, at which time the following petitions were considered. Petition number 2023-15, a petition submitted by Rachel Morris, Gary and Linda King, Nathan Sherman, and Todd Lang, requesting to vacate the east-west alley between 230 East Marion Street, 234 East Marion Street, and 1113 Christiane Street. The Commission, with a vote of 6-0, recommended approval. Petition number 2023-16, a petition of the City of Mishawaka requesting to vacate the part of Front Street not improved as a street between the east side of Church Street, Main Street Connector, and the St. Joseph River Raceway. The Commission, with a vote of 5-0, recommended approval. Sam Cressy abstained from vote. Petition number 2023-17, a request submitted by Jillian Schultz seeking to rezone property at 1644 Lincoln Way East from C1 General Commercial District to C6 Linear Office. The Commission, with a vote of 6-0, recommended approval. This is signed by Donna Burkhart, Administrative Planner, Secretary, City Plan Commission.
Thank you. This evening, we have no report of any special committee, so we'll move into ordinances on first reading.
Proposed ordinance number 2023-31, an ordinance to establish 1202 East Mishawaka Avenue as a local historic landmark within the City of Mishawaka, Indiana.
Proposed ordinance number 2023-31 will be assigned to the Land Use Planning Committee.
Proposed ordinance number 2023-32, an ordinance amending Chapter 137 of the Municipal Code of the City of Mishawaka, Indiana, is from time to time amended, commonly known as the zoning ordinance of 1966 of the City of Mishawaka, Indiana. This is right-of-way vacation for First East-West Alley north of East Marion Street, starting at Christiane Street then to the west 110 feet for the first north-south alley.
Proposed ordinance 2023-32 will be assigned to the Land Use Planning Committee.
Proposed ordinance number 2023-33, an ordinance amending Chapter 137 of the Municipal Code of the City of Mishawaka, Indiana, as from time to time amended, commonly known as the zoning ordinance of 1966 of the City of Mishawaka, Indiana. This is right-of-way vacation for part of Front Street, not improved, between the east side of Church Main Street Connector and St. Joseph River Raceway.
Proposed ordinance 2023-33 will be assigned to the Land Use Planning Committee.
Proposed ordinance number 2023-34, an ordinance amending Chapter 137 of the Municipal Code of the City of Mishawaka, Indiana, is from time to time amended, commonly known as the zoning ordinance of 1966 of the City of Mishawaka, Indiana. This is to rezone from C1 General Commercial to C6 Linear Office Commercial to permit a residential unit, 1644 Lincoln Way East.
Proposed ordinance 2023-34 will also be assigned to the Land Use Planning Committee. Resolutions.
Yes, Mr. President, we have resolution number 2023-16, a resolution of the Common Council of the City of Mishawaka, Indiana, introducing an ordinance for annexation, adopting a written fiscal plan, and a definite policy for annexation for the property located at south of 1505 South Burkett Avenue, Mishawaka, Indiana, 46544, approximately 1,320 feet south of East 12th Street.
Thank you. We will now move into the public hearing on proposed resolution 2023-16. Anyone wishing to speak in favor, please come forward.
Good evening, Mr. President, members of the council. Ken Prince, Director of Planning and Community Development. The property that you have before you for consideration for annexation is just under 20 acres and is 60% contiguous to the city. By state law, it needs to be a minimum of 12.5% to the city in order for it to be annexed. As required by state law, we're required on every annexation to investigate of how we're going to provide services to the property, specifically from a budgetary perspective. We review and send this to every department to review if it can be accommodated from their existing budget. In this case, this area of Burkett Fir is already in the city, is being maintained by the city. There are already utilities extended down that road. This is immediately across to the west of the mobile home park. This is between Dragoon Trail and 12th Street on the west side of the road. Again, all departments have indicated they can provide services under their existing budgets, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Prince? Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else wishing to speak in favor of the proposed resolution? If you would, please come forward to the podium. Then is there anyone participating remotely who wishes to speak in favor? Is there anyone in attendance this evening who wishes to speak in opposition? Please come forward. And is there anyone participating remotely who wishes to speak in opposition? Are there any council members who wish to speak? If not, then I call for the question.
Question?
Madam Clerk, would you please poll the council?
Mr. Hazen?
Yes.
Mr. Belovich?
Yes.
Mr. Mamalenti?
Yes.
Mr. Benicki?
Yes.
Mr. Emmons?
Yes.
Mrs. DeMade?
Yes.
Mr. Compton?
Yes.
Mrs. Volker?
Yes.
Mr. Hixenbaugh?
Yes.
The resolution passes 9-0. Resolution 2023-17, a resolution of the Common Council of the City of Mishawaka, Indiana, introducing an ordinance for annexation, adopting a written fiscal plan, and a definite policy for annexation for the property located west of 1500 East McKinley Avenue in Mishawaka at the northeast corner of East McKinley and Maplehurst Avenue.
Thank you. We'll now move into the public hearing on proposed resolution 2023-17. Anyone wishing to speak in favor, please come forward.
Yes, Mr. President, Ken Prince, Director of Planning and Community Development. Very similar to the last fiscal plan. This is on the northern part of the city. This is north of McKinley, just to the east of Maplehurst. Those of you that are familiar with the area, somehow when the properties were originally annexed, the first frontage, I want to say 60, 90 feet of frontage of these properties were brought into the city but the back half was not brought into the city. So in this case, the owner would like to build self-lock storage on the property and would like to annex the back portion of the property into the city. Again, it's been distributed to all departments, and they have indicated they can serve the property under their existing budgets. For the record, it's a 2.34 acre property, and it's 72.5% contiguous to the city. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Prince? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else wishing to speak in favor? Please come forward. Then is there anyone participating remotely who wishes to speak in favor? Is there anyone present this evening who wishes to speak in opposition? Please come forward. And is there anyone participating remotely who wishes to speak in opposition? Are there any council members who wish to speak? If not, then I call for the question.
Question.
Madam Clerk, would you please poll the council?
Mr. Hazen?
Yes.
Mr. Belovich?
Yes.
Mr. Mamalenti?
Yes.
Mr. Benicki?
Yes.
Mr. Emmons?
Yes.
Mrs. DeMade?
Yes.
Mr. Compton?
Yes.
Mrs. Volker?
Yes.
Mr. Hixenbaugh?
Yes.
Resolution passes 9-0. Resolution R 2023-18, a resolution of the Common Council of the City of Mishawaka, Indiana, approving an order of the City of Mishawaka Plan Commission, approving a certain declaratory resolution for the Consolidated Area Improvement Project adopted by the City of Mishawaka Redevelopment Commission.
Thank you. We'll now move into the public hearing on proposed resolution 2023-18. Anyone wishing to speak in favor, if you would, please come forward to the podium.
Mr. President, council members, Dave Wood, Mayor, here to encourage you to support Resolution 2023-18. This is a big deal for the city of Mishawaka. And if you were awake and remember some of my comments from the State of the City, housing is a huge issue for us. In fact, it's what I would consider one of our biggest challenges right now. We're fortunate on one hand. We're a growing city. Growing much quicker than most of the towns and cities in the state of Indiana, indeed maybe even in the Midwest. But what that causes for us is a challenge on the other hand, to be able to keep up with that growth. And so we are looking to encourage housing developments of all kinds in all areas of the city. But there's none more transformative than what has occurred right downtown with the partner that you're going to hear from later on tonight. When the mill came in, it was a new development for us. It was a new challenge. It was a new way of looking at what our downtown could be. And in fact, it changed. We had not done a project like that really before. And what has since occurred has been transformational for downtown. The project's not only been a huge success, but it has encouraged all kinds of new development, economic development, private development. People are living in Mishawaka for the first time ever in some cases, coming across state lines to live in Mishawaka, and to not only live in Mishawaka, but to live downtown Mishawaka. I know of examples where we have kept some of our own residents because we have options like the mill downtown Mishawaka. And I think that is encouraging, not just for us as a city administration, us as a government team, but it's encouraging for our citizens. Now they have options that they didn't have before. With that, as I mentioned, economic development, but it's kind of changed downtown Mishawaka in many ways. People look at downtown Mishawaka differently now. Now there are activities that occur downtown that never would have nor could have existed before. The attitude towards downtown has changed. Now it's an attractive spot to go and visit, not only because of the mill, but also because of a lot of the work that we've done for quality of life investments. And it's also changed the vibe downtown. Probably the thing I hear most nowadays is, wow, gosh, we love going downtown Mishawaka. What a great place to go visit on an evening. spend some quality time with family. May not live at the mill, but they wouldn't be there without it. And so now it has been successful. We're looking at doing phase 2. We don't enter into this lightly, and in fact, we have sought out in many ways and worked with a partner that we know and trust. Flaherty & Collins has been that partner. They have done everything that they said they were going to do from the start. They have been there to, whether it's sponsor events that we have, whether it's to hear concerns or whether it's to bring up their own concerns, they have been a very good partner to work with. They haven't sold and left town, but they are here for the life of the project, and we couldn't have asked for a better partner than Flaherty & Collins. And I will tell you that these projects are highly sought after in most communities in Indiana, and there's not too many who can pull these kinds of things off. Quite frankly, most cannot. We're pretty fortunate, I think, to be able to attract a project like this. And so it helps us deal with not only our growth, but to attract who we, a future for Mishawaka that we may miss. And that is to, our kids who maybe are born here, raised here, maybe go off to college. Well, this gives an opportunity for those future leaders to come here with the amenities that they want, with the lifestyle that they want. We have affordable housing, and it's getting challenging to find it, that's for sure. But we have always needed housing of all types, and this certainly fits in with that right downtown. So I would encourage you to support this. I think it's keeps the momentum alive downtown Mishawaka and really puts us on a new trajectory. We are not taking away parkland to put this project up. We've not received any tax dollars on this property since, about 1993. We've spent a lot on it, running infrastructure underneath of it and cutting the grass every couple of weeks, whether it needs it or not. This is the site, I believe, of the old coal field from Balban and later Unaroyal, but this is our chance to make it productive again and to set the tone for the future of Mishawaka. And I think it's not necessarily a risk, but it's certainly an opportunity worth taking.
Thank you. Any questions for Mayor Wood? Mr. Belovich.
Mr. Mayor, I think the only opposition you'll probably have will be from the geese. But based on the last 18 months to a year, what do you think the occupation rate, I know it was high, but in phase 1, what do you think the monthly occupation rate for residents is in that facility right now?
So our partners from Flaherty & Collins are here, Dave Flaherty and Brian Prince and Keith Cole, and they can talk to you probably more accurately than I am, but I did ask them that right before the meeting, and they said they're right about 97, 98%, which is full occupancy, really, in effect. There's always some level of people moving in or moving out, but and it's remained there, in fact, with waiting lists from what we've heard. And, we asked all the questions that the obvious ones, who the heck's living there? Because those are the questions that come to us. Well, we've heard situations, and I've mentioned them in past at states of the city and such, that at one point it was 80% come from outside of the city of Mishawaka, 35% come from outside of the state of Indiana. And so these are people who could live anywhere, and they're choosing to live downtown Mishawaka. And in doing so, they're supporting the local businesses around here, the Doc Pierce's, not only the Sun Kings and the social cantinas that wouldn't be there without this project, but they're supporting the mom and pops. I had 2 ribbon cuttings in one day of 2 retail shops opening up in the older section of the historic section of downtown. I can't remember that ever happening. So, and would it happen without the mill? Maybe, maybe not, but it certainly can't hurt to have that there and the population there who supports the local downtown.
Thank you.
Other questions for Mayor Wood? And Mr. Mayor, not a question, but a comment. Thank you for the work that you and your department heads, Mr. Prince in particular, have done to bring us to this point. I'm sure we all look forward to hearing more from the developer and others this evening, but thank you for the work that you've done.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else wishing to speak in favor of the proposed resolution? Please come forward.
Good evening, Mr. President, members of council. Ken Prince, Director of Planning and Community Development. We didn't rehearse this tonight, so at this point in time, I'd like to invite Brian Prince up to start the presentation on behalf of the developer. That'll be followed by a presentation by Baker Tilly discussing the specifics of the financial. We also have Mr. Phil Facenda here from Barnes & Thornburg, who will be happy to discuss the bond ordinance or any questions you have regarding the resolution. The resolution you have tonight is, and we should probably talk about that, is the purpose of the resolution is to split out this property. It's currently within our consolidated tax increment financing district. That financing district expires in 2039. The point of separating this into a new tax increment financing district is to extend the financing period roughly an additional 10 years. That will allow for the financing of the project. What happens is over that 25-year period, the taxes will be collected from the project, the new taxes on the property, which essentially is all of it because we've owned the property now since 1997, I believe. So all the new taxes based on the development will be rolled back into the project to pay for the debt that will pay for the infrastructure associated with the project. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. Otherwise, I will turn it over to Mr. Prince for a presentation.
Thank you. Any questions for the first Mr. Prince before we talk to the second Mr. Prince? And gentlemen, I'm going to ask for your patience for a couple minutes. For the benefit of those in attendance who may not be as familiar with TIF or those participating remotely, can you real briefly expand a little bit, what is the TIF district? What are the limitations on how that can be used? And then talk about a little bit more about this specific action to create a single site TIF district that's embedded in the resolution that's in front of us.
Okay, so this is just a little, I'll try to abbreviate my answer, Mr. President, and feel free to follow up with any questions, of course, that you have. So the purpose of tax increment financing, that's the acronym is TIF that we use. So when a property, it's a redevelopment tool that's afforded by state law, and I'd like to say that we do it as well as any. Elkhart has TIF districts, South Bend has TIF districts, and what happens is you have an area that you want to encourage redevelopment in, and to encourage that redevelopment, you need a financing source. And so by creating a tax increment financing district, what happens is the property taxes within that district. So I'll use Grape Road in the mall as an example. So the tax increment financing district in our legacy TIF district, which includes that area of the mall was constructed, and then after the mall was constructed, there was a certain assessed valuation that existed on that property. A number of years later, it was determined, well, we need a whole bunch more infrastructure up here in order to serve that area in terms of road improvements, in terms of utility extensions, and the like. And so what happened is then a tax increment financing district was created that captures the increment between what the tax rate was at that point in time, and then the taxes that are captured in terms of new development are captured for a period of time to pay for infrastructure and the associated expenses with it. So I'll use the ice rink as an example. We could use it to build the building downtown here. Tax increment financing was used to build the Ironworks ice rink. It was also used to buy the equipment that was in it. But what it doesn't pay for is the staffing and the employee cost associated with running the building. So we look at it, I mean, we have continual projects in the same area, infrastructure projects, so we do spend money. I'll use the Riverwalk as an example, is that we have restoration, we've had widening, we have drainage projects associated with it, but all those tax increment funds are associated with infrastructure. It doesn't go for the ongoing, what I'd call the maintenance cost. We can't use TIF to pay for the employees to sweep the Riverwalk with all the goose remnants that remain on those walks. So that's the different sections. The purpose of and they've changed the law regarding TIF over a period of time, so I'll briefly get into that. But we have what's called a legacy TIF that used to not have an expiration date. And then a number of years ago, the state legislature passed a law that said if you didn't have debt associated with it, that your TIF would expire. And we had a bond issue at that point in time for the Patel Center that extended it to the maximum that it could do, which was essentially 2040. So our main consolidated TIF district will expire in 2040. In this case, the tax increment, even though this area with the former Uniral properties has been in the tax increment financing district since we acquired it and demolished it using tax increment financing funds, it has generated no revenue during that period of time. But the fact that it expires in 2039 did not provide enough revenue in order for us to do this project. So essentially, we are asking for that roughly 10-year extension in order to help fund the project, which again, we think is an appropriate use of funds given the public parking garage that's located in it, as well as some of the surrounding infrastructure along the street that will be constructed as part of the project.
So as a partial summary, this isn't a situation where by creating this single-site TIF district and by financing it, our contribution through TIF proceeds, that we're avoiding, are we not, having to look at our general fund and making hard decisions about what not to spend on public safety, what not to spend on parks. We're tapping into another state-sanctioned vehicle for financing economic development projects that doesn't cause us to have to dip into our general fund to do so. Is that accurate?
Correct. So as a redevelopment tool, we're only talking about new taxes. So essentially, all the existing tax base that we have, we're not using any of that tax base in order to fund the project. We're only using the taxes generated from the project that would be going back into it.
Fantastic. Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Prince? Mr. Compton?
Yeah, Mr. Prince, and I may be getting ahead of myself, but I believe the development agreement, it speaks to city shall contribute approximately $13.6 million.
Correct?
Says to the project, $5 million on hand contributed by the commission. Help me
Correct.
understand what that means.
So in terms of when we originally started, and I presented this last week, so I didn't know what to replicate from our public meeting that we had last week. So forgive me, Mr. Compton, for not bringing that up. So yes, when the original mill project was proposed and the parking garage going in, we had a gap in funding in terms of what the development can pay for. And the nice thing about Flaherty is they provide a spreadsheet identifying what the project costs are, what the rent is, and then whatever the gap is associated with funding the project. So we knew very specifically that if we wanted this project with a parking garage in downtown Mishawaka, that there was a certain amount of funding that would have to be provided. The overall gap on this project is actually close to $20 million. And when we originally proposed it, we suggested that we didn't want it to affect any of our other projects that we had on the books at that time. And to hopefully accomplish that, we used a combination. We suggested extending the TIF district, which is before you this evening. We also suggested that they apply for ready funds. And on top of that, they've applied for state funding in terms of a grant, and Mr. Prince can get into that in more detail. But the state is providing over $5 million in grant funds to this project as well. So that $13.6 million that was identified in the development agreement is what we were required to make up, because ultimately, even though we thought the project was well-positioned for ready funds, it did not receive any ready funds for the project. So that was a gap that had to be made up. And so what we're looking to do is to take money from the consolidated TIF that it's currently in and push some of our other projects further down the road and provide that gap, that $5 million gap in cash on hand. And again, as I presented at last week's meeting, $3 million of that goes in upfront, and $2 million of that goes in when they complete the project in 2 years. So there's you have in terms of the stack of capital that goes into this, well over $40 million is being provided by the developer. Over $5 million is being provided by the state. And the remaining balance, it's identified as $13.6 million, but as will be presented by Baker Tilly, that number actually is going down. And that's going down because of the TIF, because of the economic conditions and the increase in interest rates and borrowing cost is actually going down, not up, which isn't a positive thing, it's a negative thing. So ultimately, what they can generate from the TIF is not $8.5 million, but you'll see it's more like $7.9 million from it. So when we established the development agreement with Flaherty and Collins, we set our number so it wasn't constantly fluctuating. So that's where we're at right now in terms of financing.
Well, I appreciate that, Mike. What made me question this was it said on hand, and that had, in relation to what Mr. Hicksonbaugh said, you know, what does on hand mean? I appreciate your definition or your explanation there. Thank
Correct.
you.
Thank you. Other questions for Mr. Prince? Mrs. DeMay?
Mr. Prince, you just mentioned that this would require to push other projects further down the road. Can you tell us what those projects would be?
Right, so we have a number of, and our cash position in tax increment financing, we generate roughly $18 million a year, and roughly a portion of that is committed to the stimulus bond that was approved by this council that paid for the ice rink, among other projects. The projects are currently going on in Patel and Crawford Parks, and a number of other projects that we accelerated as part of that stimulus. The projects that will be pushed on, we have very long-term capital needs. I think the examples I used to the redevelopment commission was the expansion of Union Street to Bremen. We are in acquisition mode. We haven't currently acquired Dodge Foundry. We thought we would have that foundry by now, but part of our agreement with the owner is they have to clean out the existing building before we will acquire it, and they're still working on doing that. So when I say pushed out, some things naturally, my experience in 20 years in the city is it takes longer to do projects. So ultimately, when we talk about the Dodge Foundry, we're looking at a $12 million expense over the next 5 years. So with that generation of TIF districts, it could be simply moving about 6 months, all the projects that we currently have in the tax increment financing district scheduled to be completed would accomplish that, that gap of $5 million.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Prince? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you for your patience.
Mr. Prince?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Brian Prince of Flaherty and Collins, partner here, Dave Flaherty.
Good evening, everyone. So we're going to kind of break it into three of us here. Brian Prince, who has the most knowledge, and my partner who's been running the development. I'll start off talking a little bit about the company and our history. Brian will then dive in and take it from there. And then Keith Cole, who has a lot of design skills and has been kind of overseeing this from a design perspective, he'll talk to you about that. So we're going to kind of break it into three different segments, but we welcome questions at any time, and then at the end or during, however you want to do it. But I'll start off a little bit. David Flaherty, CEO, Flaherty and Collins Properties, founded the company 30 years ago with Jerry Collins. We're very specific in what we do. All we really do are infill public-private partnerships with a big component of multifamily, which is exactly what we've done here, and you'll see some of our other developments. This is what we do. So very specific, but when it fits, it works very well for us, and we get our deals done. So let me see if I can do this right. Okay. So that just introduced the three of us. Bigger isn't always better, but we've been doing it a long time. We've done $3 billion worth of development. That's some of it's in the works today. I think actually the units we have are pushing 15,000 now, and that's we own most of those. We do manage for others, but the properties we have, we own most of those. We're not nationwide. We're not on the West Coast. We're an Indiana-based company, but we're down in Florida, and we're out on the East Coast, and we're out in Kansas. So it's still heavy in the Midwest, but we do deals outside of the Midwest as well. Here again, I said bigger isn't always better, but in this day and age, development is harder than I've been doing a long time, but 2008, 2009, nobody could get a loan. So we're not quite to that point, but it's as hard as it's ever been. Interest rates are higher, banks are getting beat up, so the only way you're going to get a loan is if you've got a relationship, and then generally, like, I'll back all our loans personally, so I sign personally, so basically everything I own, I put on the line, saying I'll repay this loan regardless of what the property does. that obviously helps get deals done, and I'm very comfortable doing this because we believe in Mishawaka and we believe in this particular development as well. But yeah, Indiana's home, so we love it here. Oops. Management. Yeah, we're a little unique. Probably the most common development approach is you build, you lease it up, and you sell the property, and you hope to make money. And there's nothing wrong with that, but that's not what we do. One, we use, 80% of the time we use our money, so it's mostly my money, and then Brian will be chipping in as well. So we put our money in, which in this day and age, when it's harder than ever to raise money, that allows us to get deals done. But, so we back them, we're in it for the long haul, we build, we stabilize, we want to hold on to the properties. So that's a little bit unique in our world. We find that it works well when you're doing public-private partnerships. You're hearing from me today. You'd like to know that I'm here, Brian's here, Keith, we're all here down the road if there's questions or issues or anything like that. So the fact that we stay in our deals long-term, we think is a real plus. We've only sold one development, I think, in the last 10 years. And I regretted selling that one, but, so we hang on to them. So I'll run through just a few examples of our deals here. Just, this is one we did in downtown Indianapolis. The mayor wanted a grocery store downtown, wanted some unique architecture, and we were able to develop what we call 360. And Brian will talk a little bit about the demographics. My wife and I actually live here, lived in the same house for years. Kids are gone. We wanted all the fun that everybody else wants. We wanted to have the walkability. We want the amenities. I never really did mow the lawn, but didn't have to do any of those things that traditionally go with a house. So, and then I walk to work. So I'm part of that demographic that's growing in our industry and especially in our particular developments. This is one on the East Coast where the train runs out of New York City into Connecticut. We like rivers, we like water, so this is a waterfront development that we're doing out there with close proximity to the train to downtown New York City. This is one in Southwest Florida that Brian has run. It's over a $100 million development. You'll see a common theme, luxury apartments, first floor retail. Some have structured parking, some don't. I'll show some other examples where we don't have structured parking, but we still kind of give it that same look. And this one's under construction, should be completed in a little less than about a year. This is over in Elkhart, another waterfront development. Here we did not, the economics could not support a garage, so it's surface parked, but it's still high density, the nicest property in town by far. A lot of the same arguments of bringing people to Elkhart that would not have come but for this particular product. We recently finished a property in LaPorte. Same concept as what we do with all our developments, public-private partnership, and it's been very successful, and we're working to start on a second phase there as well. So yeah, Northern Indiana has been a high point for us. This is one coming with the South Shore. There's a big push where they're making it much faster, and then so the state was very big on kind of getting a development right by where a new stop will be, and so there's a big public parking facility that people will be able to park and then jump on the train into downtown Chicago, and then we're doing a couple hundred apartments nearby with first floor retail. This one hopefully looks familiar. Couldn't be more proud of this development. I got to tell you that traditionally our multifamily part, we've exceeded what we kind of project. Retail has been a struggle, and when you retail, it's oftentimes it's all about, you know, what's the traffic counts or things like that, and it just shows you the strength of Mishawaka and the desire to be downtown, because we don't have the traffic counts, and normally when you hear destination retail, it's the kiss of death, but in Mishawaka, we've had unbelievable success, and that's another, not just with the apartments, but with the retail, and that's why we're bullish on doing this second phase. I say second phase, it's really the same size as the mill. So it's really, it's duplicating almost what we did there with some tweaks that Brian will talk about. So couldn't be more proud of the development. We're going to own it forever, and we want to do this one, and hopefully we can find some other things to do here in Mishawaka. So thank you, everybody, and I'll turn it over to Brian, and then we'll all be available for questions.
If we could pause for a
Follow.
second, let me see if there are any questions for Mr. Flaherty before he hands off the baton to Mr. Prince. All right, thank you, sir.
All right, thank all of you.
Let's see if this clicker works. Yes, it does. All right. Wish you had the clicker, didn't you? Good evening, everybody. Brian Prince, again with Flaherty and Collins, Vice President of Development and a Principal with Flaherty and Collins and lead project developer of this development. I kind of want to start out and talk about a few of the successes of Phase 1. I think that past performance is a great indicator of future success in anything, whether that was good or bad. So some of the great highlights, I think, from Phase 1, as the mayor mentioned and kind of stole some of my thunder a little bit earlier, you know, roughly 80% of the residents that were within the mill Phase 1 came from outside of Mishawaka. Over 30% of those were from outside of the state. And something that was a real shocker for us was the fact that the incomes were as high as they were, average incomes for the residents. So those were roughly in a ballpark of $120,000 annually. And I think another great indicator in that regard is that, I mean, we had some CEOs, we had CFOs, obviously high-level execs at some of the large corporations here in the region were staying at our development. We had a higher-up exec from Beacon Health stayed. He was one of our first leases in the development on the 4th floor in the corner unit. His home was in Naperville, Illinois, but he leased a unit here in Mishawaka, and he loved the walkability of that environment, you know, provided for him, and he's been very happy over at the mill. When we look at, we track certain information with our property management. We basically bring in a bunch of data. And so one of the things we track is, where do people go when they move away from our developments? And so obviously from an urban infill perspective, that's going to be more of your young professional as well as an empty nester demographic, and everyone kind of moves through at a different phase of life on the front end. It may be boy meets girl, you know, you get married, you have kids, family, you want the yard, things like that, and so you progress out of this urban infill type of unit. So what we have found is that roughly 50% of our people stay within the same zip code after leaving our development. So not only are we bringing you in from the outside, we're able to keep you in the same community that you've grown to love. Another great fact is, with this being a wood frame project, this is very similar to single-family home building. So while we're not able to hire 100% unions as far as the trade goes, a lot of our site work, the HVAC, plumbing, and electrical were all union contractors on Phase 1. So we were very happy in that regard. We ended up having a little over 50% or close to that was of the union trade just by default. All the retail was leased up in Phase 1, doing very well. Sun King, Social Cantina, those guys have come in, and I know Sun King, there was a report the other day that on any given week, the Mishawaka location on a great weekend could be their #1 performing store. And I think on average, out of all the Sun King locations that they have, including 15,000 square foot locations in Carmel and in Fishers, Indiana, that are at great spots, this store is 2 or 3, right? And their whole network of all their stores. They've got a downtown Indy location. So the Beeps and Ash Burgers are doing very well. The Sun King, Social Cantina, obviously being open every day. Their lunch is doing well, the lunch crowd, which we were a little bit concerned if lunch was going to be strong there. Lunch is very strong. I've talked to their CEO this morning. He's head over heels. He loves it. They're looking at potentially doing a second option for Phase 2. So Finney Hospitality Group owns 5 or 6 different concepts, and they're throughout the state, mostly Indy and Bloomington-ish. They're looking at bringing another one of their brand concepts for Phase 2, maybe some of the waterfront opportunity with the retail there. So very excited for that. Project was a catalyst, bringing great momentum for the community, and we think that's just going to continue. Some of the goals for Phase 2, just kind of following up on what I just said, is continuing to draw in people with disposable income to the community, making this a true destination. So obviously, I would tell you 230 units is never going to fill the tables every day for a Sun King and a Social Cantina. That's not what keeps their lights on. What keeps their lights on is the fact that other people, this is not a draw, and people from outside of just here come and, patronize these facilities as well. So the goal is to get more density here, bring another 227 units, bring more bodies, more retail space, and make this a true walkable district. And I think even with the other development that's coming behind us, they're only going to add to the vibrancy of the area. So we don't shun anybody developing across the street from us. We think that there's opportunity, there's a housing price point for everyone. It just makes a really great district as a whole. So one of the things that we talked about was affordability, wanted to provide more options for folks to get in. So in Phase 1, I think we were roughly somewhere around 5% on our studio units. We're roughly 12% for Phase 2, so more than double that opportunity. So the studio units give those kind of in the service level, retail workers, the opportunity to be a part of this development, get access to all these great amenities, but not pay for more unit than you actually need, right? You may be a young person or a person who may be single and you don't need a bunch of space, but you want access to all the amenities and the walkability. So we've added that option. We've also taken a reduction on our, what I would call our traditional 2-bedroom, 2-bath unit, and we've created this 1-bedroom den unit. So this 1-bedroom den unit gives you the flexibility. We're finding that our 2 bedrooms are not roommate situations. It's a couple in there or an individual who needed the second bedroom for flex space for work from home, arts, crafts, things like that. And so so you don't need the second bathroom per se, a full bathroom. So by offering the option of the 1-bedroom with a den, it gives you the functionality of what you would have gotten in a 2-bedroom, a little smaller square footage, and the check that you write each month is a smaller check than you would pay for a bigger unit, 2-bedroom, 2-bath. So we've seen a lot of success with that 1-bedroom den option, especially given the work from home, movement. Rent range for Phase 2, anywhere between $1,100 to $2,000 a month on average, obviously depending on your unit type. It still will be studios, 1s and 2s. And one great thing we're going to offer here is co-working space. So we'll have space down on a grade in the amenity area. That's a separate co-working area for folks who do work from home or collaborate. They'll be able to lease and rent private offices in this co-working space. So obviously a co-work area, but then private offices for those individuals as well, printing stations, things of that nature. Phase 2 will also have roughly 10,000 square feet of commercial space. 5,000 square feet will actually be on the riverfront, which will be a very exciting opportunity to provide waterfront dining in Mishawaka. Project costs is roughly a $63 million project. We're bringing over $40 million to the table. The state is also pitching in here just over $5.6 million. And then obviously the city help as well. The Phase 2 program's roughly 227 units. The studios are roughly 13%. I think we're like 12.7, so I'll round it up. The 1-bedroom, 47, 1-bedroom den, 20, 2-bedroom, 2-bath, 20. The garage is a 420 space garage, and there will be 130 public parking spaces, free public parking spaces within this garage as well. So I printed out some stats for more of an economic development impact. So for the project, so at 227 units, we figure roughly 1.5 persons per unit. That's 340 people in this development. If we take the average incomes from Phase 1, apply those to Phase 2 at $120,000 a year on the 340, that's $40.8 million of income in that one development just for Phase 2, right, from a salary perspective. So obviously, this leads to additional spending capacity, right, to help support local businesses, things of that nature. From a economic development job creation standpoint, this project, roughly, I'd say 28 million of the overall hard cost. The hard cost is over 50 million, so roughly 28 million will be your labor cost on this project. So if we look at this, we're estimating roughly 350 construction jobs, averaging somewhere in the ballpark of 80,000 per year with benefits, things of that nature. We will then add roughly 6 full-time positions at the property, from property management, leasing, on-site folks. If this was a phase 1 development, there'd be more positions, but because this is a phase 2, we're really just adding to what we already have in phase 1, and it'll run both properties. So we're getting some efficiencies there. So again, the payroll here from a construction standpoint, roughly 28 million bucks over 2 years, coming back into the local economy just from a labor perspective, not even including materials. Commercial jobs, so within the Beebs and Ash, within the Sun King, there's 8 full-time employees, 2 part-time employees. They average $20+ an hour, plus another $10 an hour or so in tip out. Sun King has roughly 30 employees, and their starting wage is $10 an hour. At Sun King, managers obviously make more. Social Cantina has approximately 50 employees. Average compensation is over $50 an hour, inclusive, $50,000 annually, inclusive of tips. So now I want to invite Keith up here, and Keith's going to talk more of the pretty pictures and get through some of the design and program of the layout of the facility. And then after Keith is done talking, if there are additional questions, we'll be more than happy to answer.
Would you take a pause to see if there are any questions for Mr. Prince before we turn it over to Mr. Cole? Thank you, sir.
Mr. President, thank you, council, for giving me an opportunity. Again, my name is Keith Cole with Flaherty Collins Properties. My responsibility on this was to oversee the design process and work with Ken Prince and the other folks at the city to make sure that we're meeting the goals and requirements of the site here. So give you a high-level orientation of what you're seeing on the screen. To the right of the screen, which would be actual north. The left of the screen, which would be planned south, you have Front Street. The bottom of the screen would be east on Hill Street, and the top of the screen, which would be west, would be a park project that's in process as part of city redevelopment planning. So overall layout to the south, the left of the screen, where it says Mill Phase 2, that's the 5-story parking garage as part of the project. That's wrapped to top and bottom, east and west, with some commercial and residential. The bottom left of the screen at the corner of Front and Hill, you have half of the commercial space, so approximately 5,000 square feet of commercial, potentially to be split between 2 to 3 individual commercial tenants. The bottom right of the screen up towards the river, so that the northeast corner, you'll see that there's the outdoor dining as a component of the other 5,000 square feet, tagged for hopefully a destination restaurant to be placed there. And I'll zoom in on the next video or next slide to talk a little bit more about the internal courtyard-based amenities. I did mention plan top or the west side. You can see it has the future linear park that's there. That park also doubles as fire access to service the west side of the residential building. So there's kind of dual function as it relates to that, but provides a nice transitional point between the residential piece further west with the community that's there and that side of our building. We have taken on this one where you have a little bit more walkout into the park. So there's residential units at grade that are walk-up units that are there to give a little bit different feel of community to that side of the property versus kind of that more urban walk-up that we have more towards the east side of the property. We have tried to limit the garage entry to a single point to satisfy the request of keeping as much parking as we could on the street front and not have to add additional within the garage spaces itself. The rest of the parking as it relates to the resident, that wouldn't be the 130 free spaces, is secured parking from a residence standpoint. We take a lot of care in making sure that there's a secure place for people to live and play at the same time. This next slide, Brian did say that we were able to take some economy within this being the phase 2, so all the leasing will happen out of the first phase. And so we've dedicated over 7,000 square feet of amenity space to the phase 2 resident, which will be also accessible to phase 1 resident. So it just grows the strength of community and how people play and work here. I'll go through some interior image renderings later on where you'll see some of the co-working spaces that Brian had talked about as well. To the left, there's an internal courtyard that marries up and a portion of the residential piece up against the parking structure, and that provides a passive pet park that's there. We'll have some outdoor amenities. The internal or the semi-internal courtyard, kind of to the right of the screen, will provide a little bit more active amenity. There's a pool. It'll have riverfront views, and then there's other community spaces that are supported within that zone. The bottom right, you can see a little bit more of a zoom in of the north 5,000 square foot with, we're going to go ahead and provide an exterior dining terrace as part of that initial development and retail box that's there. This rendering view is from the southeast corner. So that would be looking at the bottom level here of the lower 5,000 square foot of commercial space with stacked residential above that, and then you'll see north down the balance of Hill Street. Heading down along front, you see that there's a graphic that's the mill. We are a naturally ventilated garage that's here, and so there's more of a signage artistic installation that will be along this side to just not allow it to be the end of a parking garage here, so taking care to what's going to happen at the south end of the property, so where it's not just looking at a parking structure itself. This would be the northeast corner of the building, so you see on the first floor, that would be the other balance of the 5,000 square foot and the outdoor dining that's here. One unique thing about this property is the upper floor on this corner is also the main residential amenity space, and so we really try to be honest with the look towards the river and giving the residents what would be normally prime living space and giving it back to the community that lives within the mill phase 2. A little bit shot further out from the bridge, looking back at the community, the event center there, the ice rink. This is down the road of what the interiors will look like. So both the architecture and the interior piece is to be a paired and sister component to the first, so not to steal from the architecture, but to complement it in a similar fashion. The top left will be what the co-working is and what it looks like. So hopefully we give a nice delivered amenity for the people that want to work here as well as live here. There's mail at the top right, an extension of the co-work at the bottom left. There is, on the bottom right, a indoor, we'll call it an aqua lounge that supports the pool space, trying to create as much community as we can together. These are the views of the 4th floor terrace that I talked about. It's a community piece. It's kind of people work downstairs in the morning and play. In the evening, come up here, probably post-dinner and patronage of the other pieces of the community. And then this is just a list of both interior amenity, and there's some items on here is what we do as part of our luxury unit finishes, and so we try and deliver Class A experience to all levels of renters within the community. That should be it.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Cole?
Mr. Hicksonbaugh, I have questions for maybe the group. Where I'd like to start is the portion of the project's the parking garage, 420 spaces, 130 for public use. Can you tell me roughly, I'm going to ask you a question that you may not be able to answer, What of the 63 million, what portion of that is parking garage? And I know that this isn't going to be, I don't hold you to these figures. That's got to be a challenge to even think about.
So-
The reason I'm thinking about this is we're putting public money into this.
Right.
And I'm thinking about public space, and I'm trying to justify all this in my head. Help me out with
so
what you
that-
think the parking garage portion is.
So that parking garage, when we factor in design costs, soft costs, permitting, everything associated with it, we're roughly around 30 grand a space for this parking garage.
30 grand a space
Correct,
times 420.
correct,
Okay.
correct. So the garages are obviously, I think phase one, our garage, we were somewhere mid-20s all in per space on the garage. Obviously escalation, things of that nature, we start to push a lot higher. But this garage, in comparison to a garage we're building in Michigan City, that garage came in the other day somewhere in the ballpark of 47,000 a stall. So at 30,000 a space, I think we're ahead of the game.
Very good, thank you. And for you, Mr. Prince, because you and I've talked about this before on the other project. So we talked about e-verifying employees. Can we count on a robust program doing that? And making sure that people that should be there, people that shouldn't be there aren't there?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. That's something we take very seriously at our company, and something that we will be very meticulous about here on this development as well. And so, yeah, we give you that promise.
And I also, I remember we had discussion about independent contractors and, those kinds of things. And you assured me then you try to avoid those things and work with your subs to make sure their employees are their employees, they're getting a paycheck.
Correct.
And not just being paid cash.
Absolutely,
Thank you.
absolutely.
Those are the questions for now, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Compton. Any other questions for Mr. Prince or any of the other representatives of the developer? Mr. Mamalenti?
Thank you, Mr. Hicksonball. Thank you, Mr. Prince and your team for a great presentation. Just a couple quick questions that I thought throughout your presentation. What is in higher demand? Is it the walk-up residents? Are those in higher demand than the others?
I think that's kind of market by market specific. I would say as let's say a younger single female, that unit probably is not in high demand for her, right? What we try to do is the walk-ups where you'll see some developments that the patios are at grade, and we don't really like that. It's kind of, if you walk down the street, you want to feel like your flank is protected at all times. And so if someone's walking by on the Riverwalk or someone's walking by on the sidewalk on Ironworks Avenue, you wouldn't want for that person to just have a direct sight line into your living room. And so we think it's important to build the site up, not only because of, what was here before from an environmental standpoint that requires it, A, being a floodplain, A, environmental, but even if those things weren't there, we like to raise our first floor units up 2 to 3 feet, from grade to provide somewhat of a buffer. But I think that for those who like to, pull up, you got your groceries, you zip right into your unit as opposed to having to walk to the elevator, ride the elevator up to whatever your specific floor is, or park in a garage and go around, those units are going to be appealing to individuals. I think that what I've seen is that our walk-up units, we tend to see some of our older demographic flock towards those units because they're just easy to get to, right? You don't have to wind through the building and, walk around, but every market is kind of different of, who that unit appeals to. But I think a lot of people love, from just an urban walkable setting, that unit feels good, right? You feel like you're in an urban environment with a walk-up unit.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, and I think it was your Elkhart property that had a pool that was adjacent to the Riverwalk. And I see a similar design with this one as well. Has it ever been a concern of privacy for your residents being that close to?
No, in that situation, and this one as well, where the pool is located on the amenity deck outside is actually elevated from where the Riverwalk is. So even though people are walking by in the Riverwalk, they can't actually see the full pool deck. Here, we're even that much higher, where that courtyard is elevated. So this will be a really cool pool. It'll have an infinity edge, right? And so what'll be nice though is that as you're walking along the Riverwalk, you'll be able to see the infinity edge of that pool and see in there. And so one of the things we're kind of toying around with is, do we put the mill logo right there on the glass as you're walking by? And that could be something really cool. But from a privacy standpoint, you cannot even get from the Riverwalk up onto our area because those will all be fobbed access entry points. So the public will not be able to stumble upon or come in there. It'll be very gated to obviously keep everyone safe.
Okay, thank you. And one more follow-up question, pretty much similar to Mr. Compton's remarks, but you don't have to get into specifics. And have you learned a lot of things about the mill Phase 1 of what not to do or who to use in certain construction projects?
100%.
Okay.
So.
And you feel confident that you've remedied?
Yes.
Can remedy?
We're not here to throw anyone under the bus, but obviously you build a project in the region for the first time. We like to give everyone an opportunity, and we'll continue to want to give everyone an opportunity. Sometimes you get burned in that process, but you don't let that deter you from hiring local, trying to give everyone a fair opportunity. But obviously you don't go back to the well, right? That didn't necessarily work out the best for you. Even in that regard, successful project, great project. Obviously we're back, and want to do it again, round 2. But we also know who's great, right? Doing that first time around, and we'll have those folks back to help us bring Phase 2 to life.
Okay, sorry, and I did think of one more, if that's fine. And I know you guys typically keep your properties long-term, as Mr. Flaherty had mentioned, and I'll have a question for him later. But in terms of renovation, how frequently, or do you have that planned out to renovate these units to keep them fresh and updated?
So in our initial performance, and anytime we do a development, we have reserves that we set aside, and we collect those, take those from any of the revenues that come in. We have it set aside. We probably, every couple of years, you're always trying to see what's the next project doing, right? You don't want to get too far behind in your technology, in your units, whether it's appliances, things like that. And so sometimes what you'll also have is kind of natural attrition of things where, you may be 4 or 5 years in, there's an issue with an appliance in a unit. Well, now it's time to bring the new one in. And when you start doing that, as you turn units over, you're putting the new appliances in there, upgrading all the refrigerators in that particular unit, things of that nature. But I think every probably, what'd you say, Dave, 5 or 6 years or so, that you kind of look and see where are you in comparison to market offerings and making sure you're always on the cutting edge.
Yeah, that number sounds about right. But yeah, since we do hold them, you build them a little bit differently than you would if you were going to flip them. I mean, you don't cut corners because it'll come back to bite you. But yeah, on average, probably every 5 years or so, we would be kind of redoing things. And then things like hallway carpets, though, that happens more often. But we're always looking for, hey, let's try something new, or what's the latest in technology. So it's a constant investment on our part. But that's what, it's good, it's money well spent, is to continue to put money into the property.
While he's there, may I ask my question? Sorry. Earlier, you had kind of answered one of my questions that I was going to ask, and you said that you've only sold one property and that you, quote-unquote, regret that.
Yeah.
How long did you own that property prior to you selling that?
That one, we built it, we stabilized it. We had more stuff coming in the area. It was the Port Authority, it was out in Kansas City. They didn't really care. We had somebody beating down our door saying, I've got an exchange. They were good operators, so we ran it by the city, or actually in this case, the Port Authority. They were fine with it, so we went ahead and sold it to them. But they're like your kids, so like you don't sell your kids, but I did regret selling it, yes.
Okay. Well, thank you for the presentation. Thank you for your investment and your interest in investing again. Thank you.
Thank all of you. You have a wonderful community, and we want to continue to develop here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Emmons.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just for curiosity, over a year, what is your turnover rate, basically, each year?
In our industry, it runs about 50%. We have less turnover here than you would have on the average industry. I think people like it here. It's still people, like Brian explained, couple gets married, they're going to start having kids. The reality is they're not going to stay in a high-density property. They want the yard. So there's constant turnover, but here we have less turnover, I think, because it's such a unique property. You can't go across the street and get something similar.
Okay,
We
so
were
you
in a
said,
ballpark of 30, I think we were at 35%. So
Here.
industry average is somewhere around 50%. And at the mill, our turnover has been somewhere in the 30 to 35% range, which is really, really good.
thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for the developer?
Mr. President?
Mrs. Volker?
Hi, how are you?
Great, how are you?
Good. I do have a question, and I'm not sure who would be the appropriate person to answer it, but I'm thinking about the garage and the public versus private parking places that are available in the current mill garage, and then what will happen in the mill phase 2. And I'm just curious about the usage of the public spaces in the mill phase 1. Do we have any idea how often that garage is being utilized? Obviously 4th of July, big events, I would imagine that it's being utilized, but in a normal week with activities going on, can anyone tell me what that utilization is? Thank you.
We don't have that information offhand for one specific reason. The public parking in that garage is free, and obviously because it's free, right, we could better monitor and track that parking if we were charging for parking. So if people were coming in and actually paying for parking, we'd be able to keep tallies of all that. But the fact that it's free, first come, first serve parking for the public, it's kind of hard for us to track like the actual data movement of those cars that aren't our vehicles. The vehicles of our residents, they have a fob, and so every time they come in the garage, they swipe that fob, and we have records of what time they leave, what time they come and go. But from a public perspective, we just don't have a way of tracking that because we aren't charging for parking and, things of that nature.
Any other questions, Mrs. Volker?
No, thank you. I was just curious. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. DeMaid?
Thank you, Mr. President. So the parking, keeping on Mrs. Volker's theme here on parking, there's no charge, but there is a time limit for the parking. Someone can't be in there all day long?
Yes, in our development agreement, it says that.
Okay, and how
However,
how
in
is
the-
that,
Go ahead, sorry.
I'm sorry, how is that monitored?
So for us, that parking is city parking. It's not our parking. I think for that to be enforced from a towing perspective or ticketing, things of that nature, probably is a conversation that we had as a community, as a city, to decide how will that be enforced. We have provided the parking as part of the development and want for that to be available to the public. I believe our development agreement says that, up to 3 hours. Catch me on record here. I was saying that we're not going to tell somebody, but in theory, if someone's there for 4 hours, their car is not necessarily getting towed today. As this community develops and there's more density and maybe parking becomes more of a demand, I could imagine from a city's perspective wanting to ensure that parking is adequate, that enforceability of that parking may become more strict.
Okay, and that might be a question for Mr. Prince about the enforceability of parking.
Yes, Mr. Prince, the other Mr. Prince,
other
of
Mr.
course.
Prince, yes,
Yes,
of course.
addressed it exactly. So in our development agreement, the first 3 hours of parking are free. We felt that was very important from a city perspective to ensure that the public had free and unencumbered use during that period of time. But what we wanted was a turnover of parking. We didn't want, for example, the office users at the 112 building to park there all day without compensating the owner. That's not what it's intended for. It's intended for somebody to be able to go have dinner, walk around the park, come for a concert, and then leave. And that's how that 3 hours was set. The reality for enforcement, though, is because they chose not to put in any kind of ticketing system, there is no monitoring currently. They may prevent overnight parking by marking it or the like, and I think Mr. Prince identified it correctly, that right now it's not a problem, right? So in terms of usage, having somebody stay there for 4 or 5 hours is not a problem. They don't monitor it. As problems would occur or as additional usage would occur is when those additional restrictions, they would essentially have to put in ticketing in order to monitor it.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Other questions? Gentlemen, since we're on the topic of parking, both Mr. Princes have heard me say in the past that I believe that one of the opportunities here that we need to partner together on is to further publicize that. And granted, it's city parking, but and there is a need to try to avoid it being used for those unintended purposes that Mr. Prince, the elder, identified when he was at the podium. But I do think that if this is, as it is, embedded in the development agreement, and it is another value add to the community of the partnership that's being presented to us, that making people aware of the fact that for those events that take place downtown, we've got Cam Island Fest coming up, we have things of that nature. I think that if there's a way to do a better job of sensitizing the public to the availability of those parking spaces, that's worthy of pursuing. Any other questions for the developer? All right. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you all.
Is there anyone else wishing to speak in favor of the proposed resolution? If so, please come forward to the podium.
Good evening. My name's Emma Adlam. I'm a director with Baker Tilly. And we put together a couple of slides to summarize the bond structure and the proposed repayment of these bonds. These would be a 25-year economic development revenue bond. It would be payable solely from the TIF generated from this project in the newly created Ironworks Phase 2 allocation area, with a minimum taxpayer payment agreed to by Flaherty and Collins. The minimum taxpayer payment will be lower during the construction period. They're assuming it will be partially assessed during the construction period. So about $100,000 in 2025, about $370,000 in 26. The property is expected to be completed and fully assessed for taxes payable in 2027. So the full minimum payment would be about $850,000 starting in 2027. And then there'll be a 1.75% annual escalator on that minimum tax payment. The bonds are structured to equal the minimum tax payment. So the debt service will increase as those minimum tax payments will increase as well. There is no other revenue pledge by the city or redevelopment commission for this project. It's solely the project TIF and the minimum tax payments provided by the developer. Flaherty and Collins has brought in Hageman Capital to be the bond purchaser. So Hageman is taking the risk that the city is not taking on. They're taking the risk that the taxes will be paid and that minimum taxpayer payment will be made. The size of the bonds is really determined based on two things. It's determined based on that minimum tax payment, because that's a defined revenue stream. It's also defined based on the current interest rate environment. So the estimated interest rate is currently 7%. And so given that constraint, the TIF revenues can support a par amount of $10,762,000. Of that par amount, interest needs to be set aside during the construction period. Interest will begin accruing when the bonds are issued this year. However, the TIF revenues don't really begin in full until payable 27. So we need to borrow some of the bond proceeds need to be set aside to make those interest payments in the beginning years of a little over $2 million. So the net proceeds available for the construction of the project is estimated to be $7,880,000 of the par amount. So this chart really summarizes, it just looks at this in a graphic format, that you see the first 2 years, the revenues are shaded in the background, the columns represent the debt service payments. So the first 2 years are lower, representing those lower minimum tax payments during the construction period. And then the payments will increase, really based on that 1.75% annual increase. And then because the repayment is limited to 25 years by state statute, there's a half-year payment in 2048 because we can't go past the 25-year period. And then we were also asked to look at the local income tax revenue that could potentially be generated from this project. So starting at the top of this chart and working down, as you heard the Flaherty and Collins team, for phase one, the average annual income was about $120,000. Based upon information from the Department of Revenue, we make some assumptions for deductions and exemptions, assuming about 94% of that annual income, so bring it down to about $112,800. Of the resident assumptions that Flaherty and Collins mentioned, we're assuming about 50% are new to the county. Local income taxes are really generated based on the residents of the county. So Flaherty and Collins mentioned 80% are new to the city, 30% are new from the state. So we assume for illustrative purposes about 50% are new to the county. So with that, we have new income to the county of a little over $19 million. The 2023 local income tax rate is 1.75%. So for all of the communities combined, the new local income tax revenue is about $335,000. Now looking at what does that mean for the city specifically, we have this broken down between the kind of 4 buckets of local income tax revenue. And Mishawaka, the city, receives a portion of the different buckets of local income tax revenue. So of the $335,580 we're assuming received countywide, the city would receive approximately $26,600 in actual annual dollars from the local income taxes from the residents. And with that, we'll take any questions on either the local income taxes or the bond structure.
Thank you. Any questions? Mr. Compton?
Thank you, Mr. Hixenbaugh. To put this in my terms, for me to understand, we're going to borrow, we're going to bond X million of dollars over 24 years, and the way we're going to pay for that is the taxes that the building generates, the taxes that Flaherty and Collins pays on that building, instead of going into the TIF fund, or at least a portion of them, instead of going into the TIF fund, we'll use that to make payments on the money we borrowed.
Correct.
So we're forgoing some TIF fund money. Do you know if everything that they'll be paying in taxes in that 24-year period, above and beyond which is collecting nothing now, but beyond a greenfield site, will everything that they'd be paying in taxes be required to pay that debt, or will there be a balance left over for the TIF fund?
Sure. I'm going to go back a couple of slides. So So the debt service payments that are due are essentially equal to those minimum tax payments. In the event that the assessment is higher than this minimum and the TIF revenues are higher, then you don't have to make additional debt service payments. So this is, you're kind of protected as a floor, as your debt service payments are the minimum tax payment, but that doesn't mean they can't, the assessed value won't be higher, the tax rate wouldn't be higher to generate higher annual TIF revenue. That would stay with the redevelopment commission.
So it's possible that at least the estimates as we see them, they're considering we're going to use all of that
Correct.
income.
But it could be higher.
But it could be higher depending on the tax rates at the time. And
Correct.
thank you.
Other questions? Going back to your slide on the income tax revenue and that projection,
Sure. This one or the next one?
either. That one's fine. Is that for the mill Phase 2, or is that inclusive of both phases of the mill?
Phase 2.
So, in round numbers for a non-accountant, if I doubled that, that would be the total impact of the mill if all of the assumptions embedded in this slide attached to mill Phase 1 as well.
Yeah, assuming similar number of residents. Sure.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to speak in favor, if you would, please come forward to the podium. Then is there anyone participating remotely who wishes to speak in favor? Is there anyone present this evening who wishes to speak in opposition? Please come forward. And is there anyone participating remotely who wishes to speak in opposition? Are there any council members who wish to speak? Mr. Compton.
Mr. Hickel, I have a question that maybe Mr. Prince, Mr. Ken Prince could answer.
I kind of like the elder, or however President called it.
The senior Mr. Prince. Ken, I'm looking at the developmental agreement, and it's talking about contractors and developer contractors and consultants and such. And this is a discussion we've had lately, so I picked this up. States in here basically that if you're required to have a license by the city of Mishawaka or any other entity, which could be the state, that will be upheld on this project. That's required by this project. Do you take that as the plumbers on this project will have to be licensed and/or in a registered apprenticeship program?
So in general, so when a firm is licensed with the city, it's the firm that's licensed, not the individual employees. So part of our discussions in the past have been the people working on the project. I can tell you the individual firms definitively will be licensed. The people working, it'll be based on whatever normal practices the city follows that Mr. Hunt.
But the state law says that if you're a plumber, you're to be licensed.
So this is a,
And the developmental agreement says, or other entities involved. So that tells me that.
so, go ahead, I'm sorry.
It's fine.
Yeah.
It tells me that, maybe we should have this discussion on the side, but that tells me that we should follow what the law says.
Correct. So where I will go with this, and we've had this discussion, but you brought it up, so I'm going to bring it up on the
Yeah.
floor here. So the question lies more in terms of the scope of work and how that applies. So that's state law in terms of implementing it. But we have people that work on plumbing, and your house might be an example that
don't disagree.
where you have a discipline, in this case, a general contractor who does plumbing work that is not a licensed plumber, whether that's installing a sink or that type of item. And ultimately, I think that comes down to Mr. Hunt's interpretation or somebody from the state enforcing that law rather than to have the city. One thing that we don't want to do as a city is I don't want to fully staff somebody to go in and check every employee for every piece of work that they're doing to make sure that that person is licensed. We, as a city, have chosen that the fact that we have to have the firm licensed and bonded in order to protect the work that's happening. When you get down to that individual basis, I think is where we have the discrepancy that we'll have to work through. Nobody questions the ability to be qualified on a project, but does that mean an apprentice who is not licensed Can they work on a project or can they not work on a project?
I believe the law says you are to be a licensed plumber or in a certified apprenticeship and training program.
Okay. So,
So, and if that's what, I suggest you look at your language then.
okay.
Because it kind of, it doesn't support at least my thinking. Now, I understand about past practice and what we've done,
Right.
but we're looking at the words of an agreement.
And all I can say is the intent and how it's been enforced in the past. We've had that same language in multiple agreements over the last 20 years. And what it has meant is that we want them licensed and bonded with the city of Mishawaka as a firm, not in terms of individuals. You have those that are licensed and those that are not licensed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Prince the Elder before we let him sit down again? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And then we are back to questions or comments from the council. Thank you to everybody who presented this evening and for the work that has been done by all involved, as I mentioned earlier, to bring us to this point. This is an exciting opportunity. There is some element of risk that the developer is taking on. There's some element of risk that the city is taking on. But the way that this is structured most definitely minimizes the risk on the part of the city. It also gives me a great deal of confidence that we have the mill Phase 1 that has performed to expectations and probably exceeded expectations with regard to how this has worked out. And that's a compliment to everybody involved in that project. I also like the fact that as I think about the retail component that's on the ground floor of the mill, I don't view those as being direct competitors with any of our existing businesses in the downtown per se. And as Mr. Prince from Flaherty referenced earlier, it sounds like their philosophy is not to, they welcome others to be successful and to be in business in downtown. And I think that this is a situation where a rising tide does raise all boats. So I appreciate the work that's gone into it. I appreciate the way that the transaction has been structured, and we'll talk more details of the transaction when we get to the bond ordinance. But I am most definitely in support of this evening. Thank you. And with that, if there are no other questions or comments, I will call for the question. Madam Clerk, would you please poll the council?
Mr. Hazen?
Yes.
Mr. Belovich?
Yes.
Mr. Mamalenti?
Yes.
Excuse me. Mr. Benicki?
Yes.
Mr. Emmons?
Yes.
Mrs. DeMade?
Yes.
Mr. Compton?
Yes.
Mrs. Volker?
Yes.
Mr. Hicksonbaugh?
Yes.
The resolution passes 9-0.
Thank you. Before we move into ordinances on second reading, I have a suspicion that there are one or more council members who could use a 5-minute break before we proceed further with the proceedings. So at this time, without objection, let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break, and we will reconvene in 10 minutes at 8:42. Thank you. We will reconvene the meeting, and at this time, move into ordinances on second reading.
Proposed ordinance number 2023-24, an ordinance amending Chapter 137 of the Municipal Code of the City of Mishawaka, Indiana, as from time to time amended, commonly known as the zoning ordinance of 1966 of the City of Mishawaka, Indiana. This is to rezone from R1 Single Family Residential to R2 Two Family Residential to match existing use as a duplex at 712 Division Street.
Thank you. May we have the committee report, please?
Is that your committee report? Is it from last week? Is it?
No, it's 26.
You don't have one?
Oh, you're on 26?
24?
24.
Yeah.
2000
You would have had it for the last meeting.
What-
You didn't give, I don't know, and you gave it at the last meeting, so.
Yeah, we did.
I think I read it at the last meeting.
Okay. Then the record will reflect that absent an objection from the Land Use Planning Committee, that the matter of this proposed ordinance will be presented to the council as a whole. Any objections from the committee members? Hearing none. Any additional questions or comments from the council?
Last meeting, and she put it on again.
Then, Madam Clerk, would you poll the council on the revised committee report?
Mr. Hazen?
Yes.
Mr. Belovich?
Yes.
Mr. Mamalenti?
Yes.
Mr. Beninky?
Yes.
Mr. Emmons?
Yes.
Mrs. DeMade?
Yes.
Mr. Compton?
Yes.
Mrs. Volker?
Yes.
Mr. Hicksonbaugh?
Yes.
Committee report passes 9-0.
Thank you. We'll now move into second reading of public hearing on proposed ordinance 2023-24. Anyone wishing to speak in favor, if you would, please come forward to the podium.
I saw it. Gotta keep an eye on it.
Hello, my name is Lee Clark, and I'm the president of Empire Management, and I'm the property manager for the property located at 712 Division Street. I'm here today asking for it to be rezoned to R2 to match its current use and the use it's been used as since, near as we can tell, 1940s. There was a fire at the property. And we had to redo all of the electrical lines, and then the permitting process. That's when we discovered the non-conforming use and had to go through this process.
All right, thank you. Any questions for Mr. Clark? Mr. Benicki?
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Clark, looking at the pictures here, this looks like a pretty small little house compared to what I consider to be a duplex or you know, multi-rental type thing. I mean, it just seems awfully small. And are there other houses in the neighborhood that have steps that appear to go up to the roof?
Not that I know of. I know there are other duplexes in the area, but not constructed in that manner. At some point in the past, somebody walled off the interior wall and turned this into a duplex. The top unit is probably a little over 450 square feet. And it's just a small little one-bedroom unit, rents for right around $900 a month.
And do they have separate utilities as far as electric, things like that?
That's what we're trying to do today. Per the code, electrical code, we had to get the meters separated out so that way there can be individual meter bases for each unit with their own breaker panels.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Mr. Mamalenti?
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Clark, for attending this evening. Just a couple simple questions. Are either of the units occupied currently?
They're not occupied. They're in the process of renovation right now from the fire.
How far into the renovation are you?
They've gotten probably 60% of the way. A lot of the interior wiring's laid out. They just need to finalize the electrical permitting so that way they can get everything inspected and seal the units back up.
And if this were not to pass this evening, would it be still rented as a single unit?
It would cost a lot of money to take it back to a single unit. We'd have to do some interior renovations, open the steps back up that likely once led to the upstairs, and probably do a layout change up there. It would probably be cost prohibitive to do that.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Mr. Compton?
Thank you, Mr. Hixenbaugh. Mr. Clark, are you the owner of this property?
I'm not. I'm the property manager. The owner is RWP Investments out of Washington.
Out of Washington, state of Washington?
Yes.
How many properties do they own in our community, do you know?
RWP, that's just a partnership between the owner of one of my other companies I manage for and one of his associates. This is the only one that they own in Mishawaka. They own several others around the area, though.
I live around the corner from here, and I go by there very regularly. This has looked the same. I mean, it doesn't look very good.
Right.
Exterior,
Yep.
you know, I know you're working on the interior, but I was hoping to start seeing something that might improve, make this look a little bit better in a rough neighborhood.
Right.
And I don't, a absentee landlord doesn't have a lot of incentive to do that. I'm real concerned about this.
Yeah, so RWP, it's Daniel Williams is the owner. His other company, he never has any issues with us doing any upgrades, anything like that to the property. The whole history of it is he purchased it, with the tenant already upstairs, we did a renovation to the bottom unit, placed the tenant in there for, I believe, $1,100 a month. It's a 2-bedroom unit. And then the tenant upstairs moved out. We did a renovation to that. The new tenant moved in, and a fire immediately broke out after that. So he hasn't had a lot of opportunity to do exterior, you know, fixing it up, making it look nice since he's owned it.
How long has RWP owned this? And you've been the property manager.
Yes, I believe he purchased it in 2020 at some point. And then the fire occurred last year in June at the property, and we've been dealing with insurance and so on ever since then.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions for Mr. Clark? Mr. Belovich?
Let me understand this. So you're saying that the property has not been renovated? No one's occupied it since last June?
That's correct. There was damage to it, and we've been dealing with insurance, getting contractors lined up. We hired First Response to do all the general contracting on it, and it's just been a very, very slow process on it.
And if this is approved this evening, how long do you think it'll take for the renovations to be completed?
So they're ready to go. We missed the first reading last week. The electricians were already out there because they had issued the permits. When we missed the first reading, I believe Tuesday, they went out there and kicked the electricians off the job site. So they're trying to get it going as soon as possible to get people moved in there.
Other questions for Mr. Clark?
Yeah, are you aware of any other, when you had tenants in the year or so before the fire, did you have any problems with them? Any problems in the neighborhood? Did you hear complaints? Were there police calls? Those kinds of things?
Not to my knowledge, no. The tenant, or the individual that owns the property directly to the north, I talked with him multiple times, and he's, you know, never gave me any issues about the tenants. We do a full background check on everybody we put in there, criminal, credit, so on, income verifications. So we try to make sure that there's not going to be people in there that would be desirable to the neighborhood.
Okay, one more question. Mr. Clark, where are you located? Where is your business located?
My office address is 2537 Grape Road, Mishawaka.
Thank you. So you're local?
Yes.
Thank you.
Other questions for Mr. Clark? Sir, just a couple follow-ups then to some of the questions my colleagues posed. Like Mr. Compton, I drive by this site fairly regularly, and like I have not seen much noticeable activity, but I could be driving by at the wrong time of the day when, the work is taking place earlier in the day. I gave it another shot, just before the meeting this evening, and what I found to be somewhat concerning is as I drive by, there's a piece of wood, looks to be like half of the trellis that was on the front porch. Thank you, Mrs. DeMaid, for giving me the right term, but it's laying there, and it's been laying there for some time. And I hate to make a mountain out of a molehill, but that really doesn't speak to a property manager, a professional landlord that is trying to be a good neighbor to those in the neighborhood. So can you help me understand why that piece of wood that I probably could have stopped my car and walked up on the porch and picked up and taken back behind in the alley and gotten it out of the sight of the neighbors, why is that still there?
Well, it has not been reported to us. We're really good at dealing with code enforcement here. They all have our phone number in the office. If we'd have been made aware of it, we would have. We manage a lot of properties, over 400 properties in the area. So if we would have been made aware of it, we would have certainly taken care of it. And I'm sure that Mr. Williams did not know about that either.
You somewhat wandered into my second line of inquiry, which is with regard to the tenants who occupy this property. First of all, will it be the same folks who lived in the property prior to the fire, or would you anticipate that you're going to have a new group of tenants moving?
Yes, there'll be a new group of tenants. The tenants that were there prior, we moved them into different homes, and they're still with us. So.
Okay. So how do you monitor the activity, behavior, the interaction between your tenants and the neighborhood?
Well, we rely on, if they're not being good neighbors, we rely on the residents of the area to use the tools that are available to them, code enforcement and stuff. They can also contact our office. The neighbor directly to the north, I've given him my card, and I said, if you ever have any problems, let me know. And, he was just talking up the guy that lived upstairs because he's known him forever. So, yeah, we rely on certain community tools in the relationship with code enforcement as far as the way that the property looks from the outside.
You also mentioned earlier that there are some other multifamily units in the vicinity, and that's true. In fact, the staff report makes reference to that. But as I read the staff report and the maps attached to it, those other multifamily units are not adjacent to your property, but rather they're down Grove Street further to the west. Were those the multifamily units that you were referring to, or are there some others in that same block that we're unaware of?
No, those are the ones I was referring to.
Okay. But to your knowledge, I guess to the best of your knowledge, would you agree with me that on that block, the block that this property sits on, all of those homes appear to be zoned R1 single family?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. And again, I appreciate your answer. It has been very helpful. I have to be honest, I'm not crazy about the fact that our code enforcement needs to receive a phone call from the neighbors with regard to that piece of wood that presumptively has been laying on that front porch for some time before your firm takes some action. And I would have thought that if you've had workmen in there, electricians and others, somebody's been on site at your behest, that somehow that would have been vetted through your system. So that's concerning to me, not to criticize you or your business practices, but in terms of how this property impacts the neighbors that live in close proximity. So I am concerned about that.
Yeah, and I'll talk to the general contractor and see why, when it's in the renovation process, we're kind of in that limbo area there where we can't fully step into our job. We didn't don't have direct control over those contractors. It's part of an insurance issue thing, and it's kind of in the middle of that renovation. Our other homes that are in the area, they don't have issues like that. We take care of them. If the tenant says that there's an issue, they submit a work order request through their tenant portal, and we take care of it right away. Occasionally, some owners will ask us to, on top of our annual inspections of the properties, owners will ask us to do a biannual inspection, so that way we're driving by, making sure that everything's good in the property, there's no maintenance being deferred and things like that.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Clark? Mr. Mamalante?
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you again, Mr. Clark. Couple quick questions. Who's been mowing the property?
We have a company that does it biweekly.
And you'd referenced your working relationship with code enforcement here locally. Do you have any open violations or citations?
Not really. Sometimes I'll get a email from code enforcement because a tenant on a duplex left the trash can sitting out at the street, and we just contact the tenant and, very small things like that. There's nothing that would, draw civil penalties or anything like that, so.
Okay, and then do you know the cause of the fire?
It was an electrical fire that started in the kitchen from a light that was in there, just some old wiring. I went through it with the fire marshal, and he said, it's just like something that happens with older wiring in some of the homes. So.
And I'll echo some of the comments that were mentioned earlier. I mean, it is a bit of a concern in the fact, you said you manage 400-plus properties, but I also think that is a detriment just proven to the fact that Mr. Hicksonball and others have mentioned the falling wood that hasn't been noticed in quite some time. When this house is rented, how much managing is being done or monitoring is being done to make sure that they're good neighbors is a concern of mine. And I know you'd mentioned kind of your process bi-weekly, et cetera, or bi-monthly. Is that how often you typically drive by at least?
So there's always an annual inspection of the home.
Interior, exterior, or both?
Yeah, so there would be an exterior inspection, just walking up to it, and then you're looking for any obvious, loose siding, any wind-damaged shingles, things like that. When you go inside, we have a regimented checklist through our property management software that has us take pictures of certain items in the home and make notes on those items.
And it's just annually, just one time?
Annually would be standard. Biannual, some of our clients request a inspection twice a year, and that's usually in like rougher areas of town. If we're doing low-income rentals, things like that, they just want to make sure that the tenants are taking care of the homes.
And you had mentioned the improvements that are going to be done interiorly. Do you know of any that occur on the external side of things?
Certainly there's no plan right now to do any painting or any improvement like that. Certainly the landscaping will be cleaned up. Anything that looks not suitable to getting a good tenant, we'd clean that up just so we can get good photos of the property to get it up on the market. So it will be tightened up by the time it goes on the market.
And at the time of purchase, when the owner purchased this, it was never brought to his attention it was R1?
So I wasn't the agent. I'm not his buyer's agent. He has a different buyer agent. I would have guessed that title would have said that this is a non-conforming use, but I was never notified of that. So either it slipped through the cracks at title, which rarely happens, or he was okay with the non-conforming use. I'm not sure of that process that occurred back then.
Okay, thank you.
And Mr. Emmons?
Thank you, Mr. President. Looking at the structure, none of the condition of this house was by the fire, right?
What's that?
The outside of this home, the fire didn't do the way this property looks.
Yeah, that's probably correct. So in the back, it did a little bit of damage to the roof, but
Well, like I say, it almost looked like a substandard home.
Yeah,
I, as one, wouldn't want to move into that home, the condition that it's at, and you're not doing anything to the outside. And not only is the house, but the sidewalk, the steps up to it, the steps on the outside are hazardous. And I just don't see how I, as one, looking at the roof and everything else, and looking at the condition of the outside of this house, if I lived in that neighborhood, I'd be concerned. I wouldn't want that house next door to me.
Right, so the exterior steps, we have a plan to replace those, and then anything, when we go to market it, we have a conversation with the owner. If,
Yeah, but I mean, how long have you had this house?
what's,
How long have you been a property manager for this house?
since he purchased it,
Okay, and that was what, in 2020?
yes. So it has been a year just kind of sitting there with other contractors in the property.
And you really have done nothing to it on the outside? And yet
Right,
you had
so-
people living in there, right?
When they were living in there, it did not look like, I mean, homes, when they sit for that period of time, they become, they start
I
to
can
look
see
like.
some wear and tear, but looking at this house, that didn't happen over 2 years. So, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Clark? Mr. Compton?
Mr. Clark, I tend to support these. This isn't the first time this has happened, where a person gets in a jam because a single-family home was converted to a duplex before it was required to have zoning changes. And the house goes up for sale, or they need to get a loan, or in this case, a fire. That, oops, here we are. So they tend to come to us. And I tend to support these, even though they, if you were to come to us today and say, I want to convert this house, I would say no. But this is 1947, as I understand, and the steps inside have been removed. It just wouldn't make sense to go back to single family. I don't like the neighborhood, that it's in this neighborhood, but most of all, I don't like the way it looks. And for you to tell us that, you know, that I know it's small potatoes, as Mr. Hixenbaugh said, but this lattice laying on the front porch has been there for quite some time. Since I've been watching the house, which is well over a month now. So how long has it been that way? I'm going to support this. But with the amount of properties that you have and manage, you're likely going to see us again. And I don't, you know, I need to see these places cleaned up. We have a problem in our neighborhoods with this kind of stuff.
Yep.
Don't be part of it. You're a property manager. You're in this business. Don't be part of the problem. Be part of the solution, sir.
Yes, and we don't allow our owners to, when that property is occupied, you will see that it is going to look nice.
It shouldn't look like this now.
Yes, and
As Mr. Hixenbaugh said, just, if somebody driving by who has any say-so over this property takes 5 minutes to walk up and move something off the porch because it's unsightly, it looks abandoned. And that hurts our neighborhoods.
I agree.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Benicki?
Thank you. Parking, so is the only parking available on the street?
Yes, there's just street parking, and then to the south of the property, it went through the variance committee and they passed it. There's two spots in front, and I believe that they wanted another spot and a half, so that to the south of there, there's no other home there. It's like the backyard of the home that faces Grove Street. So they didn't see that there would be an issue, even from the historic aerial photos. There's not been a problem with parking along that road there.
So who owns the property where you want to park at?
It's the person on Grove Street, but that doesn't their property doesn't front division right there. It's like, it would be like the side of their backyard. They have a pretty large size yard there.
So is that where the fence is?
Yeah, where you see that fence. So any overflow parking from ours would be going to the south there.
So just on the street, there's no
There's no,
off-street parking
no,
whatsoever?
there's no alleyway or anything. No access for us to even put a parking pad behind the unit.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions from the council? Mr. Maramolenti?
Sorry, one more. The previous, prior to the fire, you said it was fully occupied, both locations, tops and bottom.
Yes.
You said the top was approximately, is it safe to just say one bedroom?
Yes, it's a one-bedroom with a
Bedroom.
living room and a small kitchen and
And
bathroom.
then downstairs, how many bedrooms?
It's a two-bedroom,
Two bedroom?
yes.
So at that time, prior to the fire, how many residents were currently occupied in both top and bottom?
So there was just a single male that was moved. There was a single male when he first bought it that was living there. He moved out. We renovated the unit, then we rented it back out to another single male. The bottom was rented out to a single lady, and she used the other bedroom as like a little office area.
So just two adults?
Just two adults, yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Belovich?
Yes, Mr. Clark, I have a question. Maybe I don't understand this, but the fire was in June of last year, and I would assume that the owner of the property had insurance.
Yep.
Why has it taken 13 months and the project still isn't completed?
It's just with, there was problems with the insurance company, and then I hired a company to do the general contracting. They had, I believe, problems with getting companies out there. And then finally, once we really started the ball rolling on everything, then that's when we ran into the issue when they went to go pull electrical permits.
I'm really having a problem with this, and I don't think I'll be able to support it this evening.
Thank you. Anything else for Mr. Clark? Thank you for your patience with us, sir.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else wishing to speak in favor of the proposed ordinance? If so, please come forward to the podium. Then is there anyone participating remotely who wishes to speak in favor? Is there anyone with us this evening who wishes to speak in opposition? Please come forward. And is there anyone participating remotely who wishes to speak in opposition? Are there any council members who wish to speak? Mr. Panicki?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. Looking at this house and the direct neighbors, I mean, when I'm looking at some pictures online, and the houses to the north are just very nice, well-groomed, taken care of. This house obviously needs some help, but, you know, having the steps outside, changing it at some point for financial gain doesn't make it fit this neighborhood. Like Mr. Compton said, if they came in and asked for approval today from an empty slate, we would say no. And being, you know, what it is, and that tight little, when you look at the properties all in that area, this is the smallest property. I mean, if a family were to move in there, there's no place for the kids, or parking's tight. It's not the right spot for this to be a multi-tenant facility, so I will not be supporting it this evening.
For a single-family home.
Thank you. Other comments or questions from the council? Again, thank you, Mr. Clark, for your patience. I know it's not easy when you have to stand up there and answer those type of questions, but we do appreciate it. I also will not be supporting this evening. Based upon what we've heard this evening and the additional information that's contained in the staff report, if for no other reason, I can't conclude that rezoning this as R2 single family does conserve property values in the neighborhood. Mr. Benicki referenced the houses to the north. If you drive around that block on Grove Street, the houses to the south are really well maintained as well. This home in that stretch stands out like a sore thumb. And the lack of activity to try to remediate the effects of the fire is concerning to me. The lack of urgency and care for the neighbors is not what I think any one of us would want to live next door to. And I also have supported these, I can't remember ever voting no on these, especially when it's a long-term use like this. But this is an unprecedented situation. If this was an empty lot, I wouldn't be in favor of you sticking R2 into that neighborhood when every other property on that block is zoned R1 single family. And I am not in favor of this evening, so I also will be voting no. Any other questions or comments from the council? If not, then I call for the question.
Question.
Madam Clerk, would you please poll the council?
Mr. Hazen?
No.
Mr. Belovich?
No.
Mr. Mamalenti?
No.
Mr. Benicki?
No.
Mr. Emmons?
No.
Mrs. DeMade?
No.
Mr. Compton?
No.
Mrs. Volker?
No.
Mr. Hixenbaugh?
No.
The proposed ordinance fails, 9-0. Proposed ordinance 2023-26, an ordinance annexing contiguous territory to the city of Mishawaka, Indiana, and providing zoning classification therefore. This is to annex and zone to I-1 Light Industrial District for proposed self-storage, vacant land south of 1505 South Burkett. This has been a vote only this evening.
Thank you. May we have the committee report, please?
Yes, Mr. President, to the members of the Common Council of the City of Mishawaka, your Committee on Land Use Planning, to whom is referred the matter of proposed ordinance number 2023-26, report that they have examined said matter and that their opinion should be adopted. This is signed by the entire committee, and I move for its acceptance.
Second.
Thank you. A motion has been made and seconded to approve the committee report. Any additional questions or comments? Hearing none, then Madam Clerk, would you please poll the council on the committee report?
Mr. Hazen?
Yes.
Mr. Belovich?
Yes.
Mr. Mamalenti?
Yes.
Mr. Benicki?
Yes.
Mr. Emmons?
Yes.
Mrs. DeMade?
Yes.
Mr. Compton?
Yes.
Mrs. Volker?
Yes.
Mr. Hixenbaugh?
Yes.
Committee report passes 9-0.
Thank you. Consistent with the requirements of Indiana law, a public hearing on this proposed ordinance was held at our previous council meeting. So at this time, we will throw this matter open to questions and comments from the council. And if there are none, then I call for the question.
Question?
Madam Clerk, would you please poll the council?
Mr. Hazen?
Yes.
Mr. Belovich?
Yes.
Mr. Mamalenti?
Yes.
Mr. Benicki?
Yes.
Mr. Emmons?
Yes.
Mrs. DeMade?
Yes.
Mr. Compton?
Yes.
Mrs. Volker?
Yes.
Mr. Hixenbaugh?
Yes.
Proposed ordinance passes 9-0.
No? It just passed. I wouldn't screw it up by just saying anything at this point in time.
Thanks for stopping.
Thank you, sir.
Proposed ordinance number 2023-27, an ordinance annexing contiguous territory to the city of Mishawaka, Indiana, and providing zoning classification therefore. This is to annex and zone to C4 automobile-oriented commercial, 100-foot north of northeast corner of East McKinley and Maplehurst. This is a vote only.
Thank you. May we have the committee report, please?
Yes, Mr. President. To the members of the Common Council of the City of Mishawaka, your Committee on Land Use Planning, to whom was referred the matter of proposed ordinance 2023-27, report that they have examined said matter and that in their opinion, it should be adopted. This is signed by the entire committee, and I move for its acceptance.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded to approve the committee report. Any additional questions or comments? Hearing none. Madam Clerk, would you please poll the council on the committee report?
Mr. Hazen?
Yes.
Mr. Belovich?
Yes.
Mr. Mamalenti?
Yes.
Mr. Benicki?
Yes.
Mr. Emmons?
Yes.
Mrs. DeMade?
Yes.
Mr. Compton?
Yes.
Mrs. Volker?
Yes.
Mr. Hicksonbaugh.
Yes.
Committee report passes 9-0.
Thank you. Once again, consistent with the requirements of Indiana law, we conducted a public hearing on this proposed ordinance at our last council meeting. So at this time, we'll move into questions or comments from the council. And if there are none, then I will call for the question.
Question?
Madam Clerk, would you please poll the council?
Mr. Hazen?
Yes.
Mr. Belovich?
Yes.
Mr. Mamalenti?
Yes.
Mr. Benicki?
Yes.
Mr. Emmons?
Yes.
Mrs. DeMade?
Yes.
Mr. Compton?
Yes.
Mrs. Volker?
Yes.
Mr. Hicksonbaugh.
Yes.
Proposed ordinance passes 9-0. Proposed ordinance number 2023-28, an ordinance of the Common Council of the City of Mishawaka, Indiana, authorizing the city to issue one or more series of its taxable economic development tax increment revenue bonds and approving and authorizing other actions in respect thereto in connection with the Ironworks Phase 2 project.
Thank you. May we have the committee report, please?
Yes, Mr. President, to the members of the Common Council of the City of Mishawaka, your Committee on Budget and Finance, to whom was referred the matter of proposed ordinance number 2023-28, report that they have examined said matter and that in their opinion, it should be adopted. This is signed by a majority of the committee, and I move for its acceptance.
Second.
Thank you. A motion has been made and seconded to approve the committee report. Any additional questions or comments? Hearing none. Madam Clerk, would you please poll the council on the committee report?
Mr. Hazen?
Yes.
Mr. Belovich?
Yes.
Mr. Mamalenti?
Yes.
Mr. Benicki?
Yes.
Mr. Emmons?
Yes.
Mrs. DeMade?
Yes.
Mr. Compton?
Yes.
Mrs. Volker?
Yes.
Mr. Hicksonbaugh.
Yes.
Committee report passes 9-0.
Thank you. We'll now move into second reading of public hearing on proposed ordinance 2023-28. Anyone wishing to speak in favor, if you would, please come forward to the podium.
Mr. President, members of the council, Ken Prince, Director of Planning and Community Development. We didn't want to leave the attorneys out this evening, so we'll let Mr. Facenda come and speak regarding the bond, but for the record, we'd like the testimony for Resolution 2023-18, which reflects the nature of the project and the details be reflected for this, and we're not going to repeat the same presentation again.
The record will so reflect.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Prince the Elder. Phil Facenda from Barnes and Thornburg. Bond counsel to the city. As Mr. Prince mentioned, the prior presentation presents to you the subject matter for the bonds, but it does warrant discussing the bond ordinance just briefly, which is essentially the document that authorizes the issuance of the bonds that we've been talking about, the Economic Development Revenue Bonds, or TIF revenue bonds. What is before the council is what we call a parameters ordinance, which allows us some leeway. We set upper maximums with regard to certain of the provisions of the bonds. So, for instance, you heard in the presentation tonight that was provided by Baker Tilly that somewhere around $10,600,000 in that area would be the projected principal amount of the bonds. The bond ordinance allows you to go up to 12.5. It's not anticipated that you would go so far, but that is, that's what's before you in the document. Similarly, a few more terms of the bonds that are worth noting. 7.5% interest rate. Right now, it's projected at a taxable interest rate of 7%. 25-year term is the same as was part of the presentation. And then finally, I think this point was made in spades that the bonds are payable solely from the tax increment revenues generated from the project site and the taxpayer guarantee or minimum payment. So the full faith and credit of the city is not pledged to these bonds in any way. It'll be payable solely from the TIF revenues generated from the property, and the bond purchaser is well aware of that, and their documentation will follow accordingly. I'm happy to answer any additional question you might have about the document.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Fasunda?
Okay.
Good to see you, sir. Thank you.
Good to see you as well. Thank you.
Is there anyone else wishing to speak in favor of the proposed ordinance? If you would, please come forward to the podium. Then is there anyone participating remotely who wishes to speak in favor? Is there anyone with us this evening who wishes to speak in opposition? Please come forward. And is there anyone participating remotely who wishes to speak in opposition? Are there any council members who wish to speak? If not, then I call for the question.
Question?
Madam Clerk, would you please poll the council?
Mr. Hazen?
Yes.
Mr. Belovich?
Yes.
Mr. Mamalenti?
Yes.
Mr. Benicki?
Yes.
Mr. Emmons?
Yes.
Mrs. DeMade?
Yes.
Mr. Compton?
Yes.
Mrs. Volker?
Yes.
Mr. Hixenbaugh?
Yes.
Proposed ordinance passes 9-0.
We will now move into privilege of the floor, and at this time, members of the public are invited to the podium to speak with respect to non-agenda items only under privilege of the floor. Seeing no one, is there anyone participating remotely who wishes to speak under privilege of the floor? Thank you. With that, we'll move into unfinished business, of which there is none. New business, is there any new business to come before the council? Mr. Emmons.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a reminder that I'll be having my neighborhood meeting this Thursday, which is the 20th, and then we'll have a guest speaker, will be Mayor Dave Wood, which will be giving an abbreviated State of the City address. And I know every time he gives it, there are a lot of questions and a good rapport in between the constituents and the mayor, so we look forward to it. So I invite each and every one of you to attend. And as usual, we'll have refreshments from West End Bakery because it opens up on Wednesday, so everything will be real fresh. So look forward to seeing you all there, and like I say, it should be an interesting meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other new business to come before the council? And if not, a motion to adjourn would be in order.
So
So moved.
We're adjourned. Thank you, folks.
For vacation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Don't get scared.
Yeah, like